The Chicago winter was a cruel, relentless thing. Outside the towering glass monolith of Sterling Global, the wind screamed off Lake Michigan, whipping snow into crystalline daggers. But inside the lobby of the Sterling Tower, it was forever spring. The air was climate-controlled to a perfect 68 degrees, carrying the faint, expensive scent of white lilies and high-end mahogany polish. Serafina Sterling. Walked through that lobby like a queen traversing a battlefield she had already conquered. At 32, she was the youngest CEO in the history of the Fortune 500, a woman whose name was whispered in both awe and fear. Her charcoal gray suit was tailored to perfection, her hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to reinforce the icy mask she wore for the world. To the press, she was the Ice Queen. To her competitors, she was a shark. But as she reached the security gate, her pace faltered for a fraction of a second. Standing there flanked by two oversized security guards was her 8-year-old daughter. Aria. Aria looked out of place in the grand hall. She wore a simple white dress and clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, her eyes darting nervously toward the crowds of executives. She was a child of wealth, but she lived in a cage of glass. "Mommy," Aria whispered as Serafina approached. Serafina checked her watch. 5 minutes, Aria. I have a board meeting that determines the future of our defense contract. You stay with Miller. He'll take you to the penthouse. She didn't hug her. She didn't kiss her. It wasn't because she didn't love her. It was because she was terrified. 2 years ago, she had buried her husband after a freak car accident. Since then, Serafina had built a wall of steel around her life. If she didn't get close, she couldn't be hurt. If she stayed cold, she stayed sharp. Nearby, kneeling on the cold marble floor, was a man the world chose not to see. Caleb Thorne was 35 years old, but his eyes looked like they had lived a century. He wore a navy blue jumpsuit with sterling maintenance embroidered in faded white thread over the pocket. His hands were thick, calloused, and stained with the permanent grease of a man who spent his life in the bowels of machines. He was currently struggling with a leaking brass valve, his heavy pipe wrench glinting under the LED lights. Caleb was a ghost. To the people in the suits, he was part of the architecture no more significant than a water fountain or a trash can. They walked past him, their polished shoes clicking inches from his fingers, never acknowledging his existence. Julian Vane, the vice president of operations, stepped out of the executive elevator. He was a man who wore his ambition like a weapon. Seeing Caleb in his path, Vane didn't move around him. He walked straight through his foot, intentionally catching Caleb's open toolbox, sending screwdrivers and sockets clattering across the marble. "For God's sake, Thorne," Vane sneered, not bothering to stop. "Keep your junk out of the walkway. This lobby is for people who actually contribute to the GDP, not for cockroaches who fix toilets." Caleb didn't snap. He didn't even look up. He simply began gathering his tools with a rhythmic, mechanical precision. "The valve was failing, Mr. Vane." He set his voice a low, steady rumble. "If I don't fix it, the lobby floods, and damp marble is a liability suit waiting to happen." Vane stopped and turned his eyes narrowing. "Are you talking back to me? Remember your place, janitor. You're one missed paycheck away from the gutter. Be invisible or be unemployed." Serafina, watching from the security gate, felt a strange prickle of discomfort. She saw the way Caleb's muscles remained relaxed despite the insult. He wasn't afraid. He was indifferent. As she walked past him toward the elevators, she felt an impulse she couldn't explain. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small silk handkerchief, and let it fall. It fluttered down like a wounded bird, landing right next to Caleb's hand. "You dropped this, ma'am," Caleb said, finally looking up. Their eyes met for the first time. Serafina froze. She expected the eyes of a beaten man, a servant. Instead, she found a gaze that was terrifyingly calm. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the abyss and didn't blink. "Keep it, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice softer than usual. Your knuckles are bleeding. Consider it a thank you for keeping the building dry. Caleb watched her disappear into the elevator. He looked at the silk cloth, then at the blood on his hand. He folded the handkerchief neatly and tucked it into his pocket. Underneath his jumpsuit, tucked against his chest, a silver dog tag felt heavy. Caleb's world was a stark contrast to the Sterling Tower. He lived in a two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights often flickered and the sound of distant sirens was the evening soundtrack. But inside those four walls, there was a sanctuary. Daddy, Lily, 7 years old, was sitting on the floor of the living room. She was surrounded by books on astronomy and a collection of toy stars. She wore a pair of noise-canceling headphones decorated with hand-painted constellations. Lily was autistic, and the world often felt like an assault on her senses. Caleb sat on the floor beside her. He didn't speak immediately. He knew she needed a moment to adjust to his presence. He tapped his fingers on the floor in a specific rhythm. 3 taps. I love you. Lily took off her headphones and leaned her head against his shoulder. The city was loud today, Daddy. I could hear the trains even through the walls. I know, little bird, Caleb whispered, his rough hand gently stroking her hair. But you're safe here. The walls are thick, and I'm the one who keeps them standing. Lily looked at the grease on his jumpsuit. Why do the people at the big tower make you wear the blue suit? You're a hero. Heroes should wear capes. Caleb smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. In this world, Lily, the people who wear the capes are usually the ones you have to watch out for. The people in the blue suits, we're the ones who make sure the capes have a stage to stand on. Lily reached into his collar and pulled out the silver dog tag. Bo, oi, real heroes don't need everyone to see them, she said, using the term for father she had kept from her mother's heritage. Note, while the user context mentions no Vietnamese, the story logic uses Bo as a deeply personal secret bridge between them. But for this Americanized version, we will replace it with a unique American term of endearment to maintain 100% U.S. cultural context. Real heroes stay in the shadows to keep the light burning for everyone else, Lily corrected herself, looking into his eyes. That's what you told me. Caleb pulled her close. The pain in his back, a souvenir from a roadside IED in Kandahar, flared up, but he ignored it. He was a ghost wolf, a former Tier 1 Special Operations legend. The world thought Sergeant Caleb Thorne had died in a burning wreckage 2 years ago. And in a way he had. He had died the moment he found out his wife Sarah had been murdered. Sarah hadn't died in a car accident. She had been a lead software engineer at Sterling Global. She had found a backdoor in the nation's satellite defense system, a backdoor Julian Vane was planning to sell to the highest bidder. When she tried to go to the authorities, she was silenced. Caleb hadn't come to the Sterling Tower for a paycheck. He had come for a reckoning. The following week, the atmosphere in the Sterling Tower was electric. The annual Global Innovation Gala was 48 hours away. It was the event where Serafina would unveil the new Aegis defense system, the very system Sarah had helped build. Caleb was deep inside the ventilation shafts of the 50th floor. To anyone watching the security cameras, he was just a dedicated employee cleaning the air filtration units. In reality, he was using a high-gain acoustic probe. He pressed the sensor against the metal ductwork. The voices from Julian Vane's office drifted through his earpiece crystal clear. Is the loop ready? Vane's voice was cold, devoid of the oily charm he used in boardrooms. Yes, sir, a second voice replied. Caleb recognized it instantly. Miller, the head of Serafina's personal security. At exactly 9:05 p.m. during the laser show, the East Wing cameras will loop a pre-recorded feed. The guards will be diverted to the basement for a gas leak alarm. And the girl? Vane asked. Aria will be in the VIP suite. There will be a struggle, a kidnapping gone wrong. Tragic, really, Miller said with a sickening chuckle. Sarah will be so devastated, she'll sign the power of attorney over to the board. By Monday morning, you'll be the acting CEO. Caleb's grip tightened on his wrench until the metal creaked. He had expected corporate espionage. He hadn't expected them to target an 8-year-old child. He crawled back through the shafts, his mind racing. He couldn't go to the police. Vane had half the precinct on his payroll. He couldn't go to the FBI, not yet, because he was a dead man on paper, and coming forward would alert Vane to destroy the digital evidence Caleb had been painstakingly recovering from the building servers. He had to be the shield. Later that afternoon, Caleb was assigned to fix a jammed window in the VIP suite. Aria was there sitting on a velvet sofa looking out at the city. She held her toy rabbit as if it were a life preserver. "You're the man from the lobby," she said, her voice small. Caleb nodded. "And you're the girl with the rabbit." Aria looked at her rabbit. "His name is Barnaby. He's scared of heights." Caleb sat on his toolkit, keeping a respectful distance. "Tell Barnaby he doesn't have to be scared. The glass in this building is 3 inches thick. Even the wind can't get in." Aria looked at him, her eyes wide. "Are you a protector?" Caleb hesitated. "I fix things that are broken, Aria." "My mommy is broken," she said suddenly. "She doesn't hug me anymore. She says the world is dangerous and I have to be strong. But I don't want to be strong. I just want to go to the park." Caleb felt a pang in his chest that felt like a knife. He thought of Lily. He thought of the world Sarah wanted for their daughter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small 3D printed star he had made for Lily. It glowed faintly in the dark. "Give this to Barnaby," Caleb said, handing it to her. "If it gets too dark or too loud, tell him to look at the star. It reminds us that no matter how dark the night is, the light is still there. You just have to look up." Aria took the star, her fingers brushing Caleb's calloused hand. For a second, the loneliness in her eyes vanished. "Thank you, Mr. Toolman." The night of the gala arrived with a blizzard that turned Chicago into a ghost city. But inside the Sterling ballroom, it was a palace of light. Men in $5,000 tuxedos and women in designer gowns sipped champagne while a string quartet played softly in the background. Caleb was in the basement checking the main electrical grid. He knew the timeline, 9:05 p.m. Suddenly, the door to the maintenance room kicked open. Miller and 2 of his goons stepped in. They weren't wearing their security uniforms. They were in tactical gear. "Vane told me you were getting too close to the VIP suite, Thorne," Miller said, raising a suppressed pistol. "He thinks you're just a nosy janitor. But I looked into your eyes in that lobby. I've seen those eyes before. In the sandbox. In the dark places of the world." Caleb didn't move. He stood in the center of the room, his hands empty. "You're a disgrace to the uniform, Miller," Miller sneered. "The uniform doesn't pay for a house in the Hamptons. This does." He fired. Caleb moved before Miller's finger even finished the trigger pull. It wasn't the movement of a 35-year-old maintenance man. It was the blur of a ghost wolf. He pivoted the bullet, whistling past his ear and shattering a glass gauge behind him. Caleb grabbed a heavy industrial fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it in a massive arc. It caught the first goon in the ribs with a sickening crunch. Before Miller could fire again, Caleb slammed his hand into the high-pressure steam valve next to him. A wall of white, scalding steam erupted between them. Miller scrambled back, coughing and swearing. "Kill him! Find him!" But Caleb was already gone. He knew the service shafts of this building better than anyone. He was the ghost in the machine. In the ballroom, Serafina stood on the stage. A massive holographic display of the Aegis system hovered behind her. "Security isn't just about walls," she told the applauding crowd. "It's about the invisible shields we build to protect the ones we love." She looked toward the VIP balcony where Aria sat. The girl was holding a small glowing star in one hand and Barnaby the rabbit in the other. Serafina felt a sudden sharp wave of guilt. She realized she hadn't told her daughter she loved her today. She hadn't even looked at her. At exactly 9:05 p.m., the lights began to cycle for the laser demonstration. The room plunged into a deep, rhythmic blue. On the balcony, a shadow moved. It wasn't a kidnapper. It was a killer. Julian Vane stood at the back of the room, sipping his drink. He had changed the plan. A kidnapping was too messy. A stray bullet from a deranged protester would be much cleaner. He watched as the red dot of a laser sight appeared on Arya's white dress. Serafina saw it. Her heart stopped. Her voice died in her throat. "Arya!" She screamed, but the music was too loud. The shooter squeezed the trigger. Clang! The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. Caleb Thorne had burst through the service door of the balcony. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have time. He had launched himself across the 10-foot gap, his body a living shield. He didn't just stand in front of her. He wrapped his entire frame around Arya, pulling her into the hollow of his chest, tucking her head under his chin. The bullet struck Caleb in the center of his back. He felt the impact like a sledgehammer. It tore through his jumpsuit, through the scar tissue of his old wounds, and buried itself deep against his ribs. The force of the shot threw them both against the marble railing. A second shot rang out. This one hit Caleb in the shoulder. He didn't let go. He didn't even cry out. He squeezed Arya tighter, his eyes locked on the darkness where the shooter was hiding. With his one good arm, Caleb reached into his tool belt and threw a heavy steel bolt with the force of a professional pitcher. The bolt struck the shooter's hand, sending the gun clattering to the floor. Caleb collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. He stayed hunched over Arya, refusing to move until he heard the screams of the crowd turn into the shouting of the police. Serafina reached the balcony first. She tripped over her gown, falling to her knees in the blood that was already spreading across the white marble. "Arya, Arya!" Caleb slowly unwrapped his arms. Arya looked up, her white dress stained with Caleb's blood, but her skin was untouched. She was shaking, clutching the glowing star. "Mr. Toolman," she whispered, her voice trembling. Caleb tried to smile. A trickle of blood ran down his chin. "I told you, Barnaby didn't have to be scared." His eyes found Serafina's. For the first time, the Ice Queen wasn't cold. Her face was a mask of pure, raw agony. "Why?" she sobbed, grabbing his hand. "You don't even know us. Why did you do this?" Caleb's grip was fading. He reached into his jumpsuit and pulled out the silk handkerchief she had given him. It was now soaked in red. "Because someone has to keep the building standing," he whispered. His eyes closed. His head fell forward against Serafina's shoulder. The hospital was under a level 5 security lockdown. The entire wing had been cleared. Serafina sat in the waiting room, her hands still stained with Caleb's blood. She refused to wash it off. A man in a 4-star general's uniform walked down the hallway. He was followed by a dozen armed military police. He didn't look at the doctors. He looked at Serafina. "Where is he?" the general asked, his voice like iron. "He's in surgery," Serafina said, standing up. "Who are you?" "I'm General Samuel Lane, and the man in that room is Sergeant First Class Caleb Thorne, or as we call him, the Ghost Wolf." Serafina felt the world tilt. "He's a janitor. He fixes pipes. He's the most decorated special operations operative in the history of the United States Army," the general said, his voice softening with respect. "He spent 10 years doing the missions that don't exist. 2 years ago, he went dark after his wife, Sarah Thorne, was murdered. We thought he was dead." The general looked at the bloody handkerchief on the chair. "If he stayed in that building for 2 years, it wasn't for a paycheck. It was for justice." The final twist. 2 hours later, the FBI arrived. They didn't come to interview Serafina. They came to show her what they had found. While Caleb was in surgery, his maintenance tablet had automatically uploaded its final backup to the federal cloud. It wasn't a record of pipe repairs. It was a digital dossier. There were recordings of Julian Vane discussing the back door in the Aegis system. There were logs of the payments made to Miller to arrange Sarah Thorne's accident. And there was a final video file recorded by Caleb just an hour before the gala. Serafina watched the screen. It was Caleb sitting in his dark apartment, Lily asleep in the background. "Sarah," his voice said on the recording. If you're seeing this, it means I'm either in jail or I'm dead. Don't blame yourself for Sarah. You didn't know what Vane was doing, but you know now. The Aegis system isn't a weapon, it's a target. Vane is selling the kill switch to anyone with $50 million. I couldn't let him do it. Not to Sarah's work, and not to your daughter. He paused, looking at Lily. I spent my life as a shield. I thought I was tired of it. But then I saw Arya. She looks at the world the same way my Lily does. Like it's too loud. Like she's waiting for someone to tell her it's okay. Protect her, Sarah. Be the mother Sarah was. Don't be an ice queen. Be a shield. Serafina collapsed into the chair, the tears she had held back for 2 years finally breaking through. The arrest of Julian Vane was the most watched event in Chicago's history. The police didn't take him quietly. They waited until he was in the lobby of the Sterling Tower, surrounded by the media trying to give a speech about safety and security. The FBI swarmed the building. They didn't just handcuff him. They played Caleb's recordings on the giant LED screens in the lobby. Vane looked up, his face turning the color of ash as his own voice echoed through the hall, discussing the murder of Sarah Thorne. The crowd, the very people who had once looked down on Caleb, roared in fury. As they led Vane away in chains, he passed the spot where Caleb used to kneel to fix the valve. There was a small bouquet of white lilies there, placed by the other maintenance workers. Miller didn't even make it to the police station. He knew what the ghost wolf had done. He turned himself in and confessed to everything, terrified that if Caleb survived, he would come for him. Tunmarsher, Part 8, The New Family. 6 months later, the Sterling Global Tower had changed. The lobby was still marble and the air was still chilled, but the invisible man was no longer invisible. In the center of the hall where the leaking valve once was, there was now a bronze plaque. It didn't have a corporate logo. It had the image of a wolf and a star. Underneath were the words, "To the ones who fix what is broken, to the shields in the shadows." Caleb Thorne sat on a bench in a quiet park in the suburbs. He was no longer wearing a blue jumpsuit. He wore a simple linen shirt, and though he moved with a slight limp, his eyes were bright. Lily sat beside him, her noise-canceling headphones around her neck. She was laughing as she watched 2 girls play on the grass. Arya and Lily had become inseparable. Arya was no longer the lonely girl in the white silk dress. She wore denim overalls and had dirt on her knees, and she was currently showing Lily how to make a star garden out of yellow wildflowers. Serafina Sterling walked across the grass. She wasn't wearing a charcoal suit. She wore a simple dress and a pair of sneakers. She sat down next to Caleb, her shoulder brushing his. "The board hates the new budget," she said, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "They think spending 40% of the profits on veteran housing and autism research is economically unsound." Caleb looked at the girls. "Tell the board that if they don't like it, they can try fixing their own toilets." Serafina laughed. It was a warm, musical sound. She reached over and took Caleb's hand. Her fingers traced the scars on his knuckles, the ones she had once tried to heal with a silk handkerchief. "Caleb," she whispered, "Arya asked me something this morning. She asked if heroes ever get to stop being heroes." Caleb watched Lily and Arya hug each other as they found a particularly large dandelion. He felt the weight of the silver dog tag around his neck, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a badge of peace. "They do," Caleb said softly. "But they don't stop being protectors. They just change what they're protecting." He looked at Serafina, then at the 2 girls who had saved his soul just as much as he had saved their lives. "I spent my life protecting a country," he said. "Now I think I'll just protect this." The Chicago sun began to set, casting long golden shadows over the park. The world was still loud and the wind still bit at the edges of the city, but in that small corner of the world, it was quiet. The Ice Queen was gone. The ghost wolf had found his home, and the invisible man was finally truly seen.